This episode of the Hill Country Podcast, I visit with Dr. Don Frazier, who is the head of the Texas Center at Schreiner University. We talk about the Texas Center, talk a whole lot about Texas history, what it means, and why the Texas Center is one of the leading academic institutions for the study of Texas history.
The Texas Hill Country is one of the most beautiful places on earth. In this podcast, recent Hill Country resident Tom Fox visits with the people and organizations that make this one of the most unique areas of Texas. Join Tom as he explores the people, places, and their activities of the Texas Hill Country.
I usually tell people that this is just a virtual cup of coffee with Tom. Well, today it's a real cup of coffee with Tom because we're at Starbucks. And I'm with Alex Huddleston from the Stretch Zone. And they provide stretching services, of which I am one very happy customer. But it's a much broader discussion we're going to have today. So, Alex, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
So start off telling people what the Stretch Zone is.
So Stretch Zone is a practitioner-assisted stretching facility. Basically how we make the whole thing operate, we'll come in, we'll have a discussion, we'll go through a series of tests and stretches, and we'll build a program based off of that. We try to really take a holistic look at what's going on. So for chronic sitters is probably the one that plagues America right now. Really diving in and finding what is the problem. Should it be back pain? Should it be, hey, I lean when I sit, so one side's a little tighter than the other? And you just build your program off that. There's a little more that goes into it, just with selection of stretches and really being thorough and building up enough adaptation and exposure to make great progress.
So, Alex, what might be the difference in your approach at the Stretch Zone as opposed to a chiropractor or other medical rehab facility?
Well, so chiropractors are fantastic, physical therapists are fantastic. I am a big believer in doing something to take care of yourself, regardless of what it is. Chiropractors, I mean, if you've been, you understand, hey, this is going to be more of a bone approach. Like, I'm just going to look, I'm going to see what's out of place and put it back in. That shows you my background with chiropractics, really. There's much more that goes on to it than that. Physical therapist, I like to view them as kind of a front line for what we do. They are true physical therapy. We're more therapy to get physical. Our approach is very much through the nervous system and through the muscular system, and it really works well in conjunction with a lot of other practices. And I'm a fan of both chiropractics, physical therapist, and then getting a good stretch is always fun.
So could you tell us a little bit about the Stretch Zone? This is the first place I've come across it, but they're either franchises or other businesses, Stretch Zone stores, or if that's the right term, around. So could you tell us a little bit about the business side of the Stretch Zone?
Oh, yeah. So Stretch Zone originally started as one gentleman in Florida, and his grandfather was bedridden, couldn't get out of bed, was, I think, pre-diabetic, and they just left him there, or maybe full diabetic. Anyway, Jordan, who has a doctorate in exercise physiology, very accredited, studied a lot of stretching. He originally started doing this just to keep his grandfather from getting really stiff and really starting to tighten up and go downhill, and keep him from getting bed sores so they can move him around. Well, over the course of 6 months, he went from bedridden into being able to use a walker, and they stayed with it. And a year later, he's on a cane. And then in 18 months, he's dancing at his granddaughter or great-granddaughter's wedding. And I think that's really where this got started. With Jordan himself, it grew over the next 10 years from professional athletes, kind of working with a lot of celebrities, to kind of more into back to the grassroots and getting with people and actually trying to help them. And now I think we just opened over 150 store, 150, and I think we're still in 23 states right now. And it's growing steadily. It actually opened stores during COVID.
And that's really what I wanted to visit with you about, because we had an interesting conversation about not so much the business model, but the business of healthcare, the business of self-help, the business of people actually thinking more about their health over the past 18 months than probably any other time I've been alive. And so I just wanted to maybe start with asking you, from your perspective in the broader physical therapy and healthcare services, what did you see people doing different during the pandemic?
So something that, and this is completely separate from Stretch Zone, this is more my own personal opinion on it, something that this pandemic, that COVID really exposed, was underlying health conditions. This became something that was really prevalent, and you had to think about it, and taking care of yourself, and being on top of your health, and not just relying on medication and other things. And I think that really set people up into the mindset of, oh, I have to take care of myself. I can't just have an issue and just hope to treat it with medication. I've got to either fix my diet, get outside in the sunlight, exercise, do something for myself. And I think I know that the COVID-19, which is adding weight during the pandemic, is a very real thing. But I think a lot of people came out of quarantine and they were in a little better shape than they came in. And I think that's a really interesting thing to happen.
What I really saw was probably related to that, which was people starting to think about these things, but also they couldn't go to a gym. They couldn't do something really other than perhaps walk, jog, or ride a bike. So they started doing things at home like stretching, things that they either could do from doing it way back in junior or high school, or they had the equipment to do, which is not a whole lot that you would need. Did you see really any new customers or new people exploring different types of programs like Stretch Zone?
So my time with Stretch Zone has not been, I was not with Stretch Zone during the darkest days of the pandemic. So it's hard for me to speak on that. I do know that just by scrolling through my social media feed, a lot of people were doing a lot of cool things. Like, people were building squat racks, people were building pull-up bars. They were doing things to stay in shape that they could really show. And then if you follow yoga, people were finding new and creative ways to do yoga in maybe a less than traditional space, or I saw one lady build her own complete bar studio, and I thought that was fantastic. They were taking what they had available to them and using it. And stretching is fantastic, but also just this whole guide into fitness and taking care of oneself has been it's been inspiring to see.
One of the things that we both I live in Kerrville, you live just outside Kerrville, but you work in Kerrville, so I'm going to call you a Kerrviller. But one of my observations is 30% of the people here live in Kerrville are 65 or over. Do you find that people sort of that age or above are not only open to the idea of stretching, but actually benefit from it because they really can't hit a gym hard, or they can't do real impact things?
I think so. Our brand of stretching, how we do it and how it operates, is really good for those who need exposure to a range of motion. I think the 65 and up crowd is fantastic. I applaud that demographic, that group, because this is a really active community, especially in that age group, and I think that's just great. They would of course benefit from this, but anyone who needs exposure to a range of motion would get benefit out of kind of how we do this and what we do. And we see a lot of people, I think our age range is 16 to 93 in terms of people that we've stretched in our store.
And let me take that same question and flip it the other way, age-wise, because if someone starts off with a stretch program as a teenager or early 20s, is that something they can continue throughout their life and still keep retaining the benefits?
I think so. It's a little more difficult for me to say, just because I don't have multiple years of data on anyone where I can look across and be like, oh, their hip mobility went from 45 degrees and now we're up at 105 degrees, where we can really track that across the board. I would be really interested to see. I do know that with us, we won't take anyone under 14 because of growth plates, but having a stretch practitioner, having somebody work on you, is not a bad thing. I remember being very stiff, and adding mobility as a baseball player was a big deal to kind of help my career and keep my hips and everything nice and loose. I don't deal with a whole lot of issues from baseball just because I had really good mobility taken care of.
So I probably should have started with this, but could you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
So professionally, I originally was a college baseball player and coach. Got into strength conditioning. They kind of threw me the program when I was in college and really took it from there. I made it my professional career when I was at Bluefield College in Virginia, and from there moved around, went to Tennessee Tech to work. From Tennessee Tech, bounced down to Louisiana and Texas and got my master's degree at Lamar University. Spent some time at LSU working, and then got my first head job at Garden City Community College, one of the last chance U's in Kansas. And then my wife and I decided that we needed to make a change, get closer to family, and kind of find a little more balance with what we were doing, so we could really start to develop our family and really get to spend a whole lot of time together. So we landed in Kerrville, but for the last almost decade, I was a strength conditioning coach, building programs, looking at, I have a large hip profile actually in my Google Drive. It's kind of fun. There's some if you open my Google Drive and went into some of the photos, you'd be going, that's a weird thing to have in your Google Drive. I hope nobody flags me and tries to hack into that.
So tell us a little bit about, you told us about the founding or the origins of the Stretch Zone, and that the breadth and scope of what the company is now, but as I recall, you opened this summer in Kerrville, is that right? July
the 5th we opened in Kerrville. Yeah, it's been great so far. We had a grand opening event a few months later after we were pretty well established, but it has been fantastic here so far. We've seen a lot of people, helped a lot of people, and for me, just coming in, it's been great to meet people like you and everyone else around here.
So actually we met at something called Business Expo, I think. It was back in August at a local center here, and learned a little bit about what you guys were doing. And you mentioned someone coming in for an assessment. So for me, I came in, we had basically a 1 hour where you poked and prodded and stretched me and did an assessment. Do you still have that sort of protocol for a first timer?
Absolutely, we do. I think, Tom, do you like the store-bought cookies, the ones that are in the same shape?
Like, of course.
Well, so
I like all cookies.
Who doesn't? So, but I think when you go in there, you know exactly what you're going to get. It's a very cookie-cutter approach to that cookie. Nothing beats grandma's cookies. They're handmade. I think that's more of why you need to do the assessment first, not just walking off the street and go, hey, stretch me. I want to make sure it's going to work for you, and I want to make sure this is actually something that's going to benefit you. I don't think there's any need to tie yourself down where you're going, I don't know if I'm going to get anything out of this. After I think you and I worked together for your first 3 or 4 sessions, and then I had to step away, and then I came back, and you had one visit with Jerry, and I went, wow, your hips are so much better than when I saw you last.
Right. So we've definitely seen a lot of progress in my case, and as I tell my wife, here's the downside. I get stretched. That's the absolute worst thing that happens. I get stretched, and there's absolutely no downside to that. Alex, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted any more information on Stretch Zone or how to contact you to maybe come down and get an assessment and check you guys out. How could they do so?
So you can always visit us online at stretchzone.com. It'll take you directly to our location, and you'll just fill out a profile. I'll get a nice email, and we'll be in touch as quick as we can. You can also call the store, and that number is 830-496-3648.
Well, Alex, this has been great. I've wanted to do this for some time. I really applaud you guys for opening in the summer of 2021. I thought that was a pretty good move. But I really also think that this whole sort of, I hate to use the word personal health care or paying attention to your own body, I think has become much more aware. People are much more aware of it coming out of COVID, and that places like the Stretch Zone, I think, are going to be the benefit of that.
I would just want people to be healthy and take care of themselves. It's really up to them how they do it. I'm just here to help.
Well, Alex, thanks very much.
All right, appreciate it.
This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Hill Country Podcast. I'm going to link to the Stretch Zone in Kerrville in the show notes. If you're interested in their services, which I highly recommend as a very satisfied customer, I would suggest that you check them out. I hope you will join me for another episode of the Hill Country Podcast, where I continue to explore the people, places, and things which makes this part of Texas one of the most unique. Thanks again. If you're a resident of the Hill Country and would like to tell your story, please give me a shout at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. The Hill Country Podcast is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.